Hello to the internet world. We've just been here solving all the problems of the world. So, check in on us live and you'll know these things. Welcome back to our Bible study. We're going into Deuteronomy and Luke now after Mark. So as we're moving right along here, has anybody else felt like we're really moving now after so much time in Leviticus, Numbers, like, there we go. And now it's like things are happening. Things are moving fast. So hopefully it's an encouragement now to keep going. It's back to the storyline and the characters. So before we go any further, let's open in prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord God, once again, we come to you in prayer. We're asking, Lord, now again, that you would bless this time, especially this hour as it unfolds. And we look into your word. Help us to remember, Lord, that we are looking at a true history, but it was written to tell us about you. So let's look at the theology as we try to understand the culture and the context and the history and the storylines, those marvelous storylines from Mark, Luke. God, bless this time together. Give us the right questions to ask and the right kind of responses to just bring this word to life. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so there's some general stuff I want to mention before I get to your questions. So the first thing I had was lessons about Joshua. We moved into Joshua a little while back. From the human principles, Joshua has to accept the responsibility for his life. It's almost comical. I don't know why. It's one of my favorite lines in the Bible, beginning of Joshua. And God says to Joshua, all right, Moses is dead. Let's go. It's almost that blunt. Like, all right, you did your morning. Well, let's go. And he knows his direction and goals. He's got a lesson. He's got breaking the goals down into manageable parts. You ever heard that African proverb, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Usually you're going to invade an entire country and kick out like 18 kings or 13 kings, one at a time here. And he gets started. And that's the biggest thing. I was running into problems with people at churches because my personality says, we need to be over there and we're here. Let's start walking. And there's other people who say, wait, before we move out, we need to know exactly where we're going, how long it's going to take us, what resources do we need, do we have the money, can we afford it? And I'm just like, quiet, let's go. We need to go. Get started. All right, God's principles. Pray for a design. Pray for the design. And God may test you before he helps you. I didn't realize before I read through it this time, I looked at that first defeat at AI a whole different way. And then keep your focus on God and trust God's timing. And we've been a Christian long enough, you've seen that before, right? There's no possible way out, and then a way out comes. But you really have to get down to the point where, see, not always, but with me a lot of times, I have to get down to the point where I've exhausted all my resources and everything I thought I knew would work didn't work. And I finally get back to God. I give up. I don't know. You've got to do it because I don't know what to do. And his timing comes through. So there's some stuff about Joshua. Okay, we moved into Luke. And if you're new to this Bible study, you're new to this idea, but I'm always talking about chiastic structure. And chiasm, that's not there anymore. The chi in the Greek alphabet look like a big X. But one part of the X is rigid and straight. The other part of the X is like a cursive writing, it's fluid. So it's that balance between rigid and flexibility. That's the way to think about that. So the chiastic structure, when you're putting something together that's written for the ear, again, they weren't looking at their words, they were listening to it. So they wanted to hear a pattern. And this chiastic structure, in the first part, we're in Luke now, Jesus' divine identity is confirmed. At the very end, it'll be again confirmed in connection with the Old Testament. Moving to chapter 4, and he goes up to Nazareth for a bit and his rejection. Down in the very bottom at 19 to 23, it's the passion episode and his rejection. Then moving in chapter 4 to 8, Jesus travels in Galilee and he models discipleship. In C prime, 9 to 19, he travels to Jerusalem and he's teaching the disciples how to be disciples. It's just like a track on discipleship. That's very important because we get to the question of why did Luke write? Get to that in a minute. Then the very center of it, like most of the Gospels, the Transfiguration. It's a turning point. So there's the chiastic structure. And as we move through it, I'll get something printed out that you can actually stick in the Bible later on. But I want you to think about right now, we're identifying his divinity, especially in connection with the Old Testament. I said, why did Luke write? Okay. In the beginning of Luke, he says, as others have undertaken to write these accounts, obviously other people have done it. Oral, written stuff. There's stuff out there. Apparently, he's not satisfied with what's out there. He wants to add something to it. He attempts a systematic approach. He starts out by saying, I have, basically what he says, I should go to Luke instead of paraphrasing. Almost have it memorized, as many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that had been filled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those from whom first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. A lot of stuff out there already, but I'm not happy with that. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account. Now normally we're thinking orderly account means chronologically linear. It's an orderly account. They didn't think chronological. So the question is, he's doing an orderly approach. What order was he looking at? And there's a clue right there. He's got this pet, he's doing this in order. He says the divinity on each end, like bookends and things in between. So assuming number 4 is correct, oh, it is an eyewitness to the source. That's number 3. I skipped one. Okay. Assuming number 3 is correct, the eyewitnesses, he wanted witnesses from living generation. So this tells us Luke was written within the lifespan of the people that we're talking about, which goes against all postmodern theology that says Luke was written like 100 or so years after the fact. There's other Roman historians and travel guides and people who have written stuff and published it. And if it wasn't true, there were other Romans then that said, this is baloney. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I've been to that place. It's a total lie. So you just can't write something and get away with it. People who were there would debunk you. And this is what he's saying. I get this written testimony from people while they're still alive. So you can check this. You know, Simon of Cyrene, go check out that. Rufus and that. And then this is the difference. Here I said, the travels and models of discipleship, transfiguration. And then on the other end of it, the tract on discipleship. What's he trying to do? Teaching about discipleship. He's proclaiming a unifying doctrine. He's not evangelizing. He says, this has already been out there. I too decided an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. You're already a Christian. I'm not writing to evangelize you. I'm writing to school you. I'm writing to give you the discipline of what it is to be a Christian. So you see there, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 4 different gospels, different approaches. We just got finished with Mark, and we're saying Mark was trying to convince you that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. That's an evangelistic piece. Luke is now that you accept this, and Theophilus, by the way, means lover of God. So it's either a name that a Gentile adopted as a Christian, or it could be a code name. Because the second volume, he also, in the book of Acts, Luke writes it to Theophilus. So it's a good guess that Theophilus had enough money to pay for this investigation. And so he's writing Theophilus his accounts that he's investigated. But so you'll know for certainly what you were taught. So it's not evangelistic. I want to jump back to the Old Testament again. When Joshua gets in there and he has half the people out on, I'm pointing the pointer here like you can see that. Half the people up on Mount Gerizim and the other people on Mount Ebal. And there's Shechem in the middle there. So naturally, we're going to put a town where it's easy to travel through. But there's Gerizim and Ebal. And as you can read at the top of that, this valley formed a natural amphitheater. A speaker's voice could be heard on both hillsides. Likewise, the shouts of a crowd on Gerizim could be heard on Ebal and vice versa. So there's logic behind this. There's intelligence. when Barbara and I went to, it was Laodicea, they had two amphitheaters there. The morning amphitheater was on the northeast side, and in the morning, the breeze came from behind them, and it carried their voices up the amphitheater. Then the afternoon theater was over more to the north, because the afternoon breeze would come from that end, so they could carry the voice. And it's so amazing. Barbara and some other guy went down to the stage area, and the rest of us stayed on top. And they said, well, just, sing something, just in a normal voice, see how well we could hear it. And they started thinking something like a doxology or something like, wow, that's really great. And then Barbara turned to the guy and said, what should we sing next? And we said, we heard that. And she just like, what are we going to sing next? Yeah, sing anything next. We don't care. It's like, that's amazing how good that carried. And you don't have all the ambient noise that we've got around here as well. So it's entirely possible. And, the idea that Peter could speak to thousands of people, Jesus could speak to thousands of people. Yeah. You got this natural amphitheater effect, and there's not all the other stuff, and your voice carries. But I thought that was kind of interesting, that it wasn't just, hypothetical. Yeah, they could actually see each other, hear each other up there.
So are those crowds on those hills, or are those trees?
Yeah, up where we see all through in here.
Yeah.
And in here.
Trees or trees?
Well, those are trees now. This is a modern picture.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are trees. One of the things I mentioned before was about bookending or sandwiching things, and how Mark did this a lot. There's a couple of passages that come out. It's just when you're aware of it, you look at it differently. The actual trial. Here we go, next slide. Peter, there's two trials that Mark's describing here. The trial of Jesus and the trial of Peter. And he bookends them. You start out with Peter being challenged. Then you go to Jesus being challenged. And you finish up with Peter, who denies it the third time. The roosters crow. There's one or two around here somewhere. I can't see the other one there. Yeah, there.
Oh, yeah.
There's the other one. There, three. Three times. Okay. See, art is so interesting. They do things, it's not just a chance. Three different denials, three different routes, three times. But that's an example of bookending. You start out with Peter, you talk to Jesus about Jesus, and you go back to Peter. Mark is basically telling us both of these trials are going on at the same time. One succeeds, one fails. That's that literary style. It's great written. And I thought I had another one in here. Okay, here's the other bookend. At the Praetorium, Jesus is mocked by the soldiers. Then we have the crucifixion. Then while he's hanging on the cross, he's mocked by the religious authorities. So both the civil government and the religious people are mocking him. And in the middle is the crucifixion. The more, and I guess Cindy, you mentioned, and other people have said it too, it's like you start to look at the scripture from a bigger context instead of this little story and that little story, and all the little isolated. It was never meant to be isolated. It was meant to be read in large chunks and then discussed. Exegesis and all that. But that was two examples. Another one. The women. Who's there with Jesus at the crucifixion?
The women.
The women. All right, good for you ladies. Then you have the burial. And who's there at his resurrection?
That's the women.
The women. The women. Sandwich is the burial, but on either side of that, Mark put the women. If you're thinking linear, the women were there, and then they were there the next day at the rest. Oh, put this in the middle. That's a literary technique that's used many times. Luke does it a few times too. Yeah, so maybe we think of this, maybe you'll think about it more often. Something else. Those things. Now, this is back to Joshua again. Be strong and courageous. The first time he says it to Joshua, he says, be strong and courageous. Have I not commanded you? That's more of Joshua 1:9. When he's talking to people, be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. There's about 5 or 6 times in there where that be strong and courageous verse comes up. And I love the analogy. I left it up there because I love that. A little pussycat turns into a lion, which is what the Jews were. They were afraid of their own shadow. These people they're giants. We can't take them on. They lost 40 years in the wilderness because they're pussycats. They're afraid to go in. With God's power, they can be lions. And as you look at Joshua again, over and over, you see how much God is doing the work. He even promised that I'll send the hornets ahead of them to get rid of anybody who's straggling behind. So that was that. And what's this? Oh, Mark's ending. How many? Go ahead, Mark. Just look that up. How many people have something print, whatever? It ends at chapter 16, verse 8. And then whatever else you have after that is italicized.
A shorter ending and a longer break.
Have you looked into the footnotes and find out why that is? You got it. You looked it up, didn't you?
Yeah. Some manuscripts have the following ending between verses 8 and 9, and one manuscript has it after verse 8, omitting verses 9 through 20.
Does anybody have anything about the oldest or the earliest manuscripts?
Well, it says in the 3rd century, there was this one verse added. Right?
Between 8 and 9. Some 9 all the way to
He
20.
changes failure into success.
Well, it's the point is that the earliest manuscripts, the oldest original piece, you have something there?
Yeah, it's a note. It says most reliable early manuscripts conclude the Gospel of Mark at verse 8.
Right. So if Mark is writing this intelligent piece of work, and he does this sandwiching, he has this plan, he's got this is an A, B, A prime, B prime, C story, his structure to it. What, did he make a mistake? Oh, I forgot to say what happened after that. This is Peter's preaching. He's trying to convince people that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. And he leaves it at verse 8. I'm convinced Mark intentionally stopped there with the women ran away because of fear. And so he leaves this open-ended question. What about you, reader? I've given you all the evidence you need to believe Jesus Christ is alive. He's the Messiah. Now, what will you do? Women ran away in fear and did nothing. Will you be in fear and be silent? Or will you proclaim the gospel? I think it's an interesting, challenging point there. And Mark left it there open-ended. And remember we did the study in Jonah a while back, a year or so ago. And we have that, there the pattern was get thee to Nineveh, he runs away, he encounters pagans, they pray to God, and Jonah has this beautiful prayer at the bottom of the ocean. Then the next part, get thee to Nineveh, he goes to Nineveh, encounters pagans, they encounter with God, and then he's got this bitter prayer. So they all match up, but that's not the end of Jonah, is it? What comes next? God has this conversation with Jonah. Don't I have a right to have compassion on these 20,000 people, whatever they are? And it leaves you hanging because you don't hear Jonah's response. It leaves you hanging intentionally because it's okay. What about you, reader? You've seen this whole story now. How are you going to respond? Are you going to have compassion like God does? I think Mark, it's just beautiful writing to leave it hanging like that. They ran away. What are you going to do? Are you going to proclaim the story? Are you going to tell people Jesus is alive? Or are you going to hide in fear and not do anything? Man, that's a great way to end a sermon. That just leaves it right in your lap. Okay, now it's your turn. What are you going to do? So I wanted to point that out. And then just today, I think it was, you wouldn't believe how hard I had to look for this Bible study stuff, and now I can't find it anyway. The hailstones. This is driving me nuts. I had this article about hailstones And I was holding on to it for this section, and now it's here, and I can't find it anywhere.
Is that a hailstone?
That's a hailstone from Texas. It was the largest recorded hailstone in the history of Texas. And I think it was 16 pounds,
Wow.
something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 6.4 inches. 6.4 inches around near San Antonio, Texas. It was the largest one ever found. And I pulled it out of my desk before I came in here, got sidetracked, and it's sitting on my desk. It's a Guinness Book of World Records. Somebody is at the computer or whatever. Guinness Book of World Records, the largest hailstone ever written down and recorded. I think it was something like the size of a bowling ball, something like that. But there you go. When they're invading and God sends hailstones down on them, and he kills more people than the Israelites do. Look at the size of that hailstone. I was looking at other pictures in there, and they were like car roofs, or just peppered like a machine gun went through them, because this hailstone went right through the glass, right through the metal.
6.4 inches.
6.4
I got one here, 8 inches.
8 inches. Yeah, this is the biggest one in Texas, but that's not the Guinness Book of World Records.
This was in Texas.
Okay, that was Texas.
This is South Dakota.
Okay. Well, there you get the idea. I mean, I was out in Colorado once we saw hailstones was denting car roofs. That's as big as they got golf balls, and they were denting roofs.
Like the
Imagine
truck
that.
that I drove today,
What's that?
the truck I drove today, the first year I owned it, it was reskinned 3 times because of hail.
Yeah. Okay,
So that's not
that's
the original car.
that's what I got for you. What do you got? What questions do you have?
Is AI the one where there was a fellow who kept some of the goods
Yes. Hey,
and then it killed him?
They sure did.
His whole family.
yep, him, his whole family.
It's
Yep.
pretty drastic.
Drastic. Everything that was there was committed to destruction. So what they did to Achan was the same thing they were supposed to do to AI. Yeah, that stuff was polluted, it's corrupt, it doesn't belong to have anything to do with Israel. And you did it. And so you're like AI.
Yeah.
You're committed to destruction, devoted to destruction.
Mm.
Yeah, it sounds harsh to us, but, and I know you well enough that you're not gonna take this personally, but we all need to remember, don't ever get in a position where we're judging God did something wrong. Oh, that's a bit harsh, God. I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of stuff there. Well, that sounds pretty harsh. Like, they're very, very careful about judging God on stuff. Actually trying to find that section AI, because I had some notes on that as well.
AI.
AI.
AI just captured.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Circumcision, angel, command of only. First test of obedience took 7 days to see if they were there or not. And then they were unfaithful already.
Yeah, I mean,
Achan has been called in chapter 7. Yeah, verse 25. So Joshua said, Metro, they ran to the tent, they found the silver, the gold. Joshua, together all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, sons, daughters, cattle, donkey, sheep, everything. So everything was devoted to destruction. Took him to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, you have brought trouble. Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today. So Achan is called the troubler of Israel, and Achor means trouble. So it's just a word play, the valley of trouble and Achan. And I guess one of the things I saw about that passage was God was laying down a theology and a theocracy. I'm going to be your God and I'm going to be your king. And I demand absolute devotion. These people are absolutely being destroyed because they are so evil. And you're to have nothing to do with that. Is that clear? Yeah. First time out of the gate, Achan messes it up.
Yeah.
How serious are you? It's the first. And again, and there's other ancient texts from other kingdoms where a warrior in the process of attacking a village or a city is not allowed to stop and take booty because it's distracting to the army. Oh, look at the gold here. They stop the advance. And in those passages, those people are executed as well. Their whole families are wiped out. So it's not just unique to God that they kill Achan messed up now. Achan. This would have been standard military punishment for anybody in the military who stopped and took booty when they were under orders not to stop and destroy everything. So everybody in the ancient world would go, yeah, that's about right. Yeah, that's what you do with somebody who does that. You used to shoot deserters because that's what you did. You were in the front line. You don't run away, shoot them.
So was it common practice to go into a town once you killed the army and then wipe everybody out? I just see I'm just curious about I'm trying to say this in the right way.
I know you're not challenging God.
I'm just curious about the compassion that God had for the pagans with Jonah, but he said, wipe them all out.
Mhm.
I don't want to see a kid. I mean, why couldn't these, I'm just curious why they couldn't have been changed, why they couldn't have, children are children, that's always been the innocent. And it just seems, and unless they were that foul.
That's the point. That's the point. They were that foul.
And God knows what they're gonna be eventually. So
God told them back when God said, I'm going to give you this land, but not until the sins of these people have reached their completion. And that took about 400 years. So God knew they were evil back then, and he knew they were going to get worse and worse. And they were so repulsive to him that he vomited them out of the land. He just total destruction. And that's what you're not supposed to have anything to do with that stuff.
Well, and if he would have tried to convert the children with the Israelites, they probably would have ended up like Achan, because they probably would have went back to their old ways anyway.
Well, for one thing, all the boys would have been duty bound to revenge their fathers, so they would have tried to kill all the Israelites they could. Grow up, you avenge your parents,
Yeah.
So at the very least, you'd have to kill all the boys besides the men. And with the women who've had men would seduce the Jews to do something like Balaam's sin. And even we're doing the study in churches in the Revelation during Wednesday night Lenten services, 2 or 3 times the sin is sexual immorality. And these people were steeped in it. So even the young girls probably would have known something about sexual immorality. So yeah.
Now, when you were talking about all these other little towns that potentially could have just been left alone, that obviously would have been God's compassion to, we don't need to wipe everybody out because they weren't really part of the big problem.
And they weren't the leaders. See, you have Jerusalem there and you have Hebron and those places. They were the walled cities that basically controlled the territories.
Yeah, they were the pilots.
So goes the king, so goes the country.
Yeah.
So they would have been leading everybody into that. We were talking right before Bible study started, when Joshua goes in and he takes on the 5 kings of the south and then takes on the kings of the north. I keep thinking there's 10, but I can't count 10. It's 10 or 13. What he does is he completely destroys everything according to what God told him to do. There simply weren't enough Jews to actually occupy the entire land. And we were saying before study started here that Israel is about the size of New Jersey. So even a big invading army, they can't completely occupy every village and every town, but they own the territory. They own Jerusalem. They own that territory. And I'm sure, like what's happening in Ukraine now, when Israel comes in, village folks are out the door until the war's over. Then they come back home. And you get later on in David has to conquer Jerusalem all over again. Well, the Bible says they got it back in Joshua's time. Yeah, they took it, but they didn't maintain it. Someone else said, Jerusalem's not a real good place to have a city. There's no big water supply there. It's between two different mountains. It was great for David because it was geographically in between both Judah and Benjamin, but it was between all the different tribes, and none of the tribes owned it. So he didn't take over a town from Judah. He didn't take over he took over a town that no one else owned. Great place to have a capital. No one can claim ownership of it except him. But as far as a city, when you go back a bit, the Gerizim and Ebal, Shechem. Shechem's a great place to have a city because it's a trade route. If you're coming and going and doing business, you go through the valley. Yeah, so I won't get too far off track, but so destroying everything, it was the people who owned the territories. Well, what are they trying to do Ukraine now? What's their target? Their big target? It's Kiev. Because that's the capital. You take Kiev, you pretty much demoralize everybody.
I think their target's France.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Okay, I'd love to get political, but we're not going to.
So when you had mentioned about the hail,
Wait a second, did I answer, there was a question that started this 10 minutes ago. Did I answer that? Okay.
it seemed interesting that hail killed more than the Israelites killed. So they obviously realized the power of this military was so huge, they better just hightail it out of here. Because I mean, if there was that many leaving, they weren't killed.
Turned tail and ran.
Yeah, I mean, they must have just realized that, you know, all the rumors were true.
They knew the rumors were true, and they thought they'd go ahead and attack Garrett.
Yeah, the one that made the treaty with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, isn't there something interesting in here? The story about Joshua is God trying to guide his people away from the corrupting influence of the others in that territory. So that's why they're taking them over and getting rid of the bad ones and allowing a few of them that are decent to intermingle. But I mean, it's corrupting influence of the society around them. And that's something like we have today.
Yes, and in addition to that, he was using the Israelites as a core base. This is a kingdom of priests. So all the people around go, wow, what an amazing God you guys have. So if you start polluting that from the very beginning, you lose that pure nucleus. And there's no witness to the rest of the world. So, okay, bring it to the 21st century. If our church is polluted by the influence of the world, there's no difference from us in the world. There's no reason for the world to look at us and go, wow, what a God they've got. Instead of saying, well, they're just like us. They grumble, they backbite, there's infighting, why should we follow their God? So the purity was something that God was doing with the Israelites and putting them smack dab in the middle of the universe for the ancient Near East. Israel was the crossroad between Egypt and Mesopotamia, Babylonia, the Hittites to the north. Everybody, so put them right smack in the middle, and as long as they're honoring God, it shines. And one of the things about the hailstones and Jericho, hi buddy, for those who got a dog here tonight, say hi to everybody. The things about Jericho was who really defeated Jericho? It's God.
Yes.
Yeah, the walls fall out in every direction. So Israelite, you're turned from a kitten into a lion, but it's God who's in charge. And Ai, you lost because you violated God's law. And there was someone made the comment, one of the commentaries said, what Achan was to the Jews was what Eve was to humanity. Everybody suffered by the sin of one person. Adam was not Adam and Eve, their universal sin. Everybody suffered. Achan violates this purity law. Everybody suffers. They lost 2,000 to 3,000 men because of his. Now, losing 2,000 to 3,000 men compared to one family and their cattle and sheep. But the point is, God is in control, and I can do this, but you need to follow me. And yeah.
And so it is interesting, in Exodus, you have the Israelites who are fewer in number than the Egyptians, right?
Yes, yes.
And they are able to, with God's help, get out of that. And here, they are fewer in number than the lands they're trying to take over. And they're, again, with God's help, they are able to take over. Yeah, interesting.
It's all about God.
And a few centuries later, there were fewer Christians.
There are fewer Christians now.
Yeah, and then they are able to take over.
Now, we're making ground, but 2% a year is my last reading. Worldwide, we're growing about 2% a year. And we're the largest religion, and Muslims are catching up, but, you know, convert or die kind of would influence me, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. For those of you on the internet, my wife left today for New Orleans, so Ruby, our dog, is like really clingy. So here she is, hanging on my lap. Trying not to be too distracting, okay, Ruby? What was that village? The Gibeonites. Gibeonites, right? That made the deal there. Okay, so what was their problem? How did Joshua sin with this deal? Did you catch that?
Well, they told a lie about why they wanted to do the treaty.
Yeah.
And they tricked him, basically. But
Yeah.
then he kept it, he actually kept the treaty with them, even though he found out that they did lie to him.
Well, they had to. You make a treaty like that, you swear by your God, you swear it's your
Yeah.
stuff. Someone said it's like an arrow shot from a bow. You can't bring it back once you take those vows. But, and I didn't write it down here, and I should have. If you find where that actually happens.
So even under false pretenses, you still have to follow through.
Jacob tricked
Do what you
Isaac
say.
into getting the blessing.
Right. Do what you
And
say.
isn't there anything? He said, I'm sorry, I gave the blessing.
Yeah.
It's out there. I can't take it back now. But Joshua, somewhere in there, it says Joshua's sin is he didn't consult God. Bread's warm, giving nights. Okay. Verse 14 in chapter 9. Israelites sent for provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them, let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. We talked about suzerain vassal treaties. This is a clear example. Israel was recognized as the suzerain. These guys were recognized as the vassals. They took the oath, and you know the standard oath. Here's the history. We're from way up there. You're from there. These are the major stipulations, these are minor stipulations, and we swear by our gods that we'll be true to this treaty.
Now let's eat.
Now let's eat. Then they would have had a meal. Yeah. And then you find out that you lied. Well, we have sworn by our gods that we were going to stand by this treaty. And now you're stuck with it. But his sin was he didn't consult God. Who's in charge here? Yeah. Was God not available? God's speaking to Joshua either through the prophets or visions, you know. So that was the sin, and Ai messed up because there was a sin there. Somewhere I wrote in my books here, and it's incredible that God was that close and that real to them, where He would tell Joshua. I love the line when they get defeated by Ai. And Joshua, he does in terry clothes, he's laid down, he cries out to God, what's wrong? What happened? God comes along and says, stand up. Basically, he said, why are you even asking what went wrong? Didn't I tell you? If you obey me, be victorious. If you don't obey me, you're going to lose. You lost. What does that tell you? Why are you crying out? What happened? Stand up. I love this. Like, come on, put your big boy britches on. What's that?
Joshua wasn't paying attention.
Yeah,
But those Gibeonites survived this way.
they did.
Otherwise, they'd have been with everyone else.
They would have been wiped out, absolutely. So,
So you
Good
gotta
for
give them
tricky
some
them.
credit there.
yeah. And the Jewish people can't be too bad because Jacob was the trickster. He was the usurper.
True.
He made his bones by being tricky. Yeah. Yeah, chapter 7, verse 6 to 9. Joshua was tested and he cried out. And in verse 10 to 12, God says, stand up. What are you doing on your face? Basically what it comes down to. And earlier I said in the things about Joshua, God will make a promise, but he's liable to test you to see how you do. Joshua failed that test. He didn't know to go to God right off the bat. And he doesn't go to God at Bethel for Gibeonites. So he missed that mark. A little bit hard on Joshua. Joshua shows up very well in this passage. I found that there's only 4 men called the servant of the Lord in the Old Testament. The entire Old Testament. There's Moses in Deuteronomy 34:5, David in Psalm 18:36, the suffering servant in Isaiah 42:19, and then Joshua is mentioned twice. Joshua 24:29 and Joshua 2:8. Judges. I can't read my writing. Judges 2:8. He's mentioned as a servant of the Lord. It's only 4 people in the entire Old Testament. He gets mentioned twice for that. So I don't be too hard on him. He had a huge task. But still, God is saying, do it this way or there's trouble. I think Joshua got the lesson. Okay. It's hard, I guess, sometimes for us to put us into the culture of the ancient world. We think it's hard to kill Achan and his entire family. That's what they did. You know, there's evidence from another, I forget it was a Hittite or some other king in Chronicles mentioned that someone was killed because they violated the law as an affront to God, and they and their entire family was killed out. So that's military punishment. You know.
And that's the word, military. It's like the discipline of the military is what has had to be applied in this olden time.
I still think there's some Middle Eastern culture that, you do something to a family and they're gonna wipe you all out.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's been pretty well.
Revenge.
There again is an example. We look at the Old Testament now and God said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. That's brutal. That was limiting.
Yeah.
You can't do any more than an eye for an eye. They lost you. You can't cut their head off. No, you can't escalate.
Yeah.
Every other religion in the world, you bring a knife, I'll bring a gun. You bring a gun, I'll bring a machine gun. It would escalate. Yeah.
When Moses died, it actually said God buried him.
Yeah.
So it was just him and Moses.
Probably the whole company of angels. Yeah. And I don't see Yahweh out there with a shovel.
Oh, well, he could kill them all with that. I'm sure he could.
There is a
Pretty nice burial.
talk about, people with memories and stuff. The generation before me had to memorize long sections of poetry and stuff for school, just as an exercise in memory. There was a guy in our group down in Salisbury. He memorized the burial of Moses. And it's like, if you wrote it out for like 5 pages. And it's a beautiful poem. It talked about the angel procession carrying Moses down the mountain to this beautiful passage. It's like, I'm amazed he could remember it. He was in his 80s. There's something he remembered all this. So, yeah, he didn't get a human burial. He got buried by God and heavenly entourage. Which, by the way, he did make it inside Israel, right? You know when? Transfiguration. He is up on the mountain with Jesus. But yeah, it seems like, oh, what a shame you never got a real burial. You got a heavenly burial. That's not too bad.
We don't know where his burial site is today, apparently.
Yes, and that's another reason that you don't make you don't make an idol out of a human. If we knew where Moses, there'd be a shrine, there'd be temples, there'd be people fighting over it, all kinds of, because that would become a monument.
Yeah.
And people would idolize it. So this is one good way for God to keep anybody from making an idol out of his bones.
But they certainly heaped up a lot of stones everywhere. Like
Yeah.
stones.
They're still there today.
Yeah, the heaps of stones are
They're
still
still
there
there
today.
today.
Yes.
Oh, heaps of stones. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That certainly weren't monuments, but.
They were warnings, because they heap those stones in front of, well, they did it in front of the cave. They do it at the gate of the city. Who's buried underneath there? The king,
Yeah. I
After
think
we
that would
impaled
hang
them,
on a tree.
which, by the way, they would kill the person before they'd impale them. That wasn't like the medieval torture where they would impale a person, plant the impaler.
They killed them before they hung them.
They killed them before they impaled them. So they were stuck up there as a symbol, as a sign. This is what we did to that king. And then they brought him down before nightfall. At the end of the day, don't leave him up into the next day, and put the stones over him as a, and people, the verbal heritage. Dad, what's that big old pile of stones over there? Let me tell you a story about,
They must have done that 31 times because there was 31 kings they killed.
Right, there's a lot of heaps of
if
stones.
they did that with everyone, yeah.
That kind of blew my mind when I figured out there was 31 kings that they killed.
Total, yeah. But we have a different idea of kings today. You know what it took to be a king? You'd be in charge of a village that had a wall around it. And you're a king.
Wow.
Anything that had a wall was a place where people would go to in times of crisis. They'd go inside the city wall, and whoever's in charge of that city was the king. So the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, they were just cities big enough to have walls. And then they controlled the countryside. So they made all the people in the countryside give them money so they could support an army and do all that stuff. That's why there were so many kings, because they're all little fiefdoms, basically.
Right, and then the king had to take care of them if they had to come inside the city for the
Yes.
refuge.
Yeah.
The king got impaled in the end.
Well, win or lose,
Go to the boss.
Yeah.
The little piles of stone that you were talking about, still there today. The mountain that you showed, were the two mountains,
Yeah.
one on the right hand side, they found the pile of stones on that mountain. Only it wasn't a small pile, it was huge. They couldn't figure out what it was because it was rounded rocks, just like God asked, cemented together with ash, and it was a big platform.
That wasn't a burial mound, that was the altar where
That was the altar.
It was the altar, yes. I didn't print it somewhere, I saw that as I was surfing through the internet. You could find it.
That's why it takes me so long to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's surfing.
I'm surfing.
In the fall of Jericho, they mentioned a commander of the army. And it said,
It's Joshua 5.
Joshua
Yeah, the
5.
angel.
13 to 15.
Yeah. Is there any indication of who that angel was? I mean, was it Gabriel? Was it?
Yeah, someone.
Well, here's a
The chapter says.
rhetorical kind of think back on your own question. So, is Gabriel the commander of the Lord's army?
I think the Lord would be the commander of the Lord's army.
In the book of Revelation, who comes out in that horse with the robe dipped in blood, commander of the angel army? Yeshua, Jesus. So was it Jesus? Was it actually Jesus that spoke to John in the book of Revelation? It was his angel. It was all the manifestations, the white hair, the fiery eyes, all that was Jesus. And as the commander of the Lord's army, the other thing that I noticed about that is, where is it? He says this. Oh, Joshua's pretty cool there. He sees this angel up there with the sword drawn. So it was 5?
Yeah, 5:13, it starts fall of Jericho. Neither says, but the commander of the army of the Lord, I have
The
now
man
come.
standing.
Then
Yeah.
Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked, what message does my Lord have for his servant?
I love Joshua says, so you for us or against us? Let me know. Make that connection. And he says, neither. I'm not for you or them. You don't understand who I am. Commander of the army of the Lord I've come. So he falls down on the ground in reverence and give a message for my Lord. Every other time the angel appears and someone falls down, he says, no, don't worship me.
Yeah,
He never corrects him here. That tells me it's God.
yeah.
Otherwise, the angel said, no, don't do that to me. I'm not worthy of reverence. You don't bow down before me.
Okay.
An angel would know that you don't bow to anybody but God. And he's not corrected there. So that's good enough for me. Yeah. But I love that exchange. I mean, he's not quaking his boots. He sees a man there, but he knows he ain't no normal man.
Well, he didn't take his shoes off because it's on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My note said that that's parallel to the command that Moses was given at the burning bush.
Take your shoes off. You're on holy ground.
So, yeah, okay.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that.
I
That's
didn't read
one
that
I-
note.
Yeah, I just saw that, and I thought, that's an interesting way to say that.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, Gabriel, Michael, and then I thought, nah, it's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be the big guy.
That's like it is, yeah. And that's the telling point. He doesn't correct it when he bows down and worships him.
I've been Googling some stuff, but then there's some stuff I just write down,
Okay.
bring back. She writes down.
Being prior service, anytime something military comes up, kind of perks my attention.
Yeah.
How do we respond to this? The centurion sees the angel and he, basically, what can I do for you?
Yeah.
The thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you were Army, Commander's more Navy, right?
Yeah, well, commander of the army, commander of the
My
army.
dad was Navy, that's why I said.
I forgive you. Yeah.
In Joshua 10:16, who was the person that found the king's hiding cave?
Would have been any of the scouts. We don't really know who. I think it just came back to him when Joshua was told that the 5 kings had been found hiding in the cave. He said, roll a large stone. So, yeah, and guard it. So we don't know who that was that discovered it.
Oh,
It's crazy. Who's on Zindo's cave? I guess there wasn't a lot of cover. So they,
Yeah, they
that's
were
kind
hoping
of
they
what
could
the cover
hide.
was.
I thought they were.
One of the things that in kind of, I guess, normal warfare, something like that, when the killing's going on, it's this mass killing. Once the killing stops, there's a chance that you can parlay and maybe get out with your life. This comes up in 1 Samuel when Saul takes a tribe, but he doesn't kill the king. And he brings him before Samuel. Samuel draws somebody's sword and hacks the guy to death. God said, kill them all. And the king that got killed, he was thinking, oh, okay, maybe the anger's over. Maybe I can live now. So there might be something that, just get over the worst of it. When they're all done with the bloodshed, maybe we can work something out.
And the king's usually kind of held back anyway. You don't put the king right in the middle of the battle, I would assume.
Well, back in their day, the kings were the fiercest warriors.
Oh,
They were
so
the
they
ones that
were
led
the-
in the battle.
Oh.
The reason they became kings is they were tougher than anybody else.
So they must have been the fastest runners if it got.
Well, they might have been that fast too, yeah. Yeah.
Fastest horses.
Yeah,
The
fastest
alliance-
horses.
Well, that's interesting too, because they didn't have the horses. The alliance of the 5 kings probably would have had them in some kind of a command tent directing
Yeah.
the motion. So they're not 5 different armies doing, so they might have been together when it's time to flee, headquarters, bug out time, and go hide someplace. Well, the hiding place got found out. He said the horses. Now, when he attacks the northern armies, what's different about that? Do you remember this?
Hamstring
The horses.
They had hamstring the horses and
And
burn.
burn the
the
chariots.
chariots.
What did we say the horses and chariots were back in their era? They were the tanks. They were your, so now the guys in the south didn't have chariots. The guys in the north did. The southern territory is more mountainous and hilly and stuff. The northern territory is where this breadbasket, plains, Megiddo, that all the major battles were fought up near Megiddo because it's big open plains. So you can run chariots. They didn't do horsebacks like cavalry. The horses were meant to pull the chariots, which were made out of wood, and the iron fixtures would have been maybe nails, studs, axles, maybe something like that. So you can burn them because they're wood. So they take on the 5 kings first and destroy them. Then they take on a bigger army, as many as the sand of the sea, and better equipped, more money, because the trade routes would have gone through there. They had more power and money, and he wipes them out too. They might have tried to flee on their horses, but not these guys. And again, in their world, because they so totally believed in gods and deities, if my God's bigger than your God, I don't care how many people you got, we can win. That was the underlying message that God was trying to convince Joshua and the army all along. You guys got to do your part. I'm going to win the battle for you. I'm going to make the walls fall down. I'm going to kill more people with hailstones than you guys are. I'm going to defeat a chariot army, outnumbering you maybe 5-1 or whatever it was, because it ain't your numbers, and it ain't you doing the victory. It's me. As long as you obey me and follow me, it goes well. That's kind of the message all the way through the scriptures. You keep me first, and I will bless you. It's hard to see anywhere in scripture where that doesn't come through. And it's going to look really bad sometimes. And that's where you're really being tested. I mean, I'm not a sailor, but the thing is, anybody can sail a boat in calm weather. Doesn't take much to sail a boat it's when the storms come up and the waves are raging. That's when the real test of seamanship comes in.
Just trained for
Yeah. So anybody be a Christian when it's easy, right? You know that challenge and no threatening stuff. It's when you're tested that God sees where your heart is, what you're really made of. And so there used to be a program called, I'm talking all the time anyway. Any other questions?
In Luke, Pam and I were talking about when Mary went to stay with Elizabeth for 3 months, it said.
Yeah.
Pam's like, why wouldn't she be with her family? Now, Elizabeth was a relative. It didn't say if it was an aunt or whatever. Cousin. But why would she go stay with her? I was wondering if it was actually to keep her out of the hysteria of, oh my gosh, this girl's pregnant, they're not married yet.
That would have helped. For one thing, to go.
Advising her.
People don't really show until like the third month.
Yeah, that's what she just said.
Okay. But for one thing, it's like the angel just told me the story. I got to go check this out. Then you find out it's true. And
That
she's that
Elizabeth
close.
was pregnant.
Yeah.
And in those days, you didn't just go over for a weekend because of the distances.
No.
You just stayed on.
What I've heard people say is like, there's 3 months and she leaves. And then we have the story of Elizabeth giving birth. Why did she stay for the birth? She did. I mean, we're just telling a story here, not a chronological story. She was there for the 3 months till after she gave birth, great celebration. Okay, now I'm going home. By the time she goes home, Joseph's got it figured out, and it's okay, we're married, don't worry about it, kind of stuff. But staying there to help Elizabeth. I mean, it's a little harder in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th month when you're pregnant and you're how old she was. Married.
It's hard when you're young, I think. Although these people were unbelievable. Moses running up and down a hill.
Again, power of God. Yeah. Anybody else? Zechariah and Elizabeth were blameless before God. That does not mean they were sinless. It means they honored God. They did their best. They did everything within their power. God couldn't blame them for anything. So it wasn't because they were sinners that she wasn't pregnant. Because that God didn't close the womb because they were blameless. There was nothing that they did that was wrong that she couldn't get pregnant. Doesn't mean they were perfect. Doesn't mean they were without sin at all. All right.
Well, when Zechariah lost his voice, he was in the Holy of Holies.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Now, as I understand it, they put a rope around the ankle so that if they're taking too long or something like that, they can pull them out.
Well, if they're not pure and God doesn't like them, he'll kill them. So how are you going to get the body out?
Yeah.
That's what the rope is for. Yeah.
So it sounds like they were getting ready to do that. Was that
Well, it's like,
correct?
it should have been out by now. I mean, it's a once in a lifetime thing for a priest. There's so many priests. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to go into the Holy of Holies. But they knew how long it took. And he wasn't coming out. So, but if the rope is still kind of moving around a little bit, I don't know. But they were starting to get a little nervous.
Oh.
Yeah. And I love the comparison between when Gabriel tells Zechariah, and Zechariah says, well, how do I know this is true? And Gabriel tells Mary, and Mary says, well, how can this be? I'm a virgin. Zechariah says, shame on you. I stand at the right hand of God. Who are you to challenge me? I said, all right, you ain't got to talk until this baby's born. Here's your punishment. Mary, Don't worry about it, kid. We got you. You're covered here. You're blessed by God. Zechariah should have known better. As a high priest, not the high priest, it's his turn to go in. He's a priest. He should know if this is Gabriel shows up at the right hand of God, the Holy of Holies, believe what he's saying. Shame on you for not believing the word of God with as much information as you have. Now, 13-year-old virgin girl, don't worry about it, Mary. It's cool. We got this. Just trust me.
Well, and then Zachariah doesn't get his voice back until the circumcision.
Till the naming.
Yeah, and the
The
naming
naming.
would have been at that same time.
It's interesting too. When he tells Zechariah the name's going to be John, and we find out later there's no one in the family named John. Remember back to Genesis when God tells Adam, "I want you to name all the animals." What did that mean? You get to name the animals.
Control.
Master. Who's in charge? We got to name Ruby her name because we're in charge. God says his name will be John. You understand that? Mary, his name's going to be Jesus. You get that? I'm naming him. I'm in control here. And Yeshua and Joshua are the same name. So in a lot of sense, I mean, God made the promise to Abraham, the great founding father. Moses was the one that God worked it through. Joshua was the one that led the people into the promised land. In our faith, who's going to be taking us into the promised land? Yeshua. Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus. Same name from Hebrew to Greek. It's just like Joshua is a big part of a shadow foreshadowing what we see in Jesus. He's the one that actually finished the job, which it's a lot of great analogies here. And I certainly hope, I know we're past our time, we'll end this in just a minute. Don't ever get the idea that because we spent a year going through the Bible, okay, we're done with that. We are scratching the surface. I'll tell the story again. You probably heard it before, but New Testament professor reads biblical Greek like I read English. He got to class one day and he said, I saw something in scripture that I was so excited during my devotion. I couldn't wait to tell you guys in class. And it's like, this guy is finding new things about scripture. All right, I'm set for life. I can study this my whole life and never get it all. So I hope you're getting a good taste for it and getting your appetite for another round later on and just keep digging. And we are out of time. So God bless you all. Y'all don't have to leave right away, but be sure to time. We're going to knock off for the hour and keep reading. We'll meet again next Tuesday at 6:15. Ruby, I need my own back. Got to sign off here. So.